A man swore an oath before God, on the bones of saints, with his hand trembling over holy relics that glowed in the candlelight of a Norman chapel, and then, just 2 years later, he shattered that oath like it meant nothing, like the divine consequences didn't exist, like heaven itself wasn't watching. That betrayal would drench an entire island in blood, reshape the fate of millions, and create a wound in history that still bleeds today. This is the story of how one broken promise led 600 knights to cross a channel of death, how a single day of violence rewrote the destiny of England, and how a man's pride transformed him from a duke seeking justice into a monster he never meant to become. September 28, 1066. The Norman coast. Dawn breaks cold and gray over 700 ships that creak and groan against their moorings like chained beasts eager for release. Duke William of Normandy stands at the water's edge, boots sinking into wet sand, his hands trembling not from fear but from rage so pure it burns hotter than any forge. In his grip, a piece of parchment, crumpled now, stained with salt spray and the sweat from his palm. The messenger who brought it stands 10 feet back, wise enough to keep his distance from a man whose entire world has just been stolen. The message is simple, devastating, impossible to accept. King Edward the Confessor of England is dead, and Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex, the man who knelt before William in friendship, the man who swore loyalty, the man who placed his hands on sacred relics and called God as his witness, has seized the English throne. William's voice, when it comes, is barely a whisper, but everyone within earshot feels their blood turn cold. He swore. Before God he swore. His advisors exchange glances, nervous, uncertain, because they've seen William angry before, seen him in battle, seen him crush rebellions and break enemies. But this is different. This is the fury of a man who believed the universe operated on rules, on honor, on the sanctity of oaths, and has just discovered that perhaps it doesn't. His half-brother Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, a man who wears both the robes of the church and the armor of a warrior with equal comfort, steps forward carefully, his voice measured. My lord, Harold sits on the English throne now, crowned by their bishops, accepted by their nobles. What would you have us do? And William turns, his eyes dark as a winter sea, and speaks the words that will change everything. I will have what is mine. Harold broke his oath. He will answer to God, but first he answers to me. But to understand why this moment matters, why this betrayal cuts so deep it will justify an invasion, a war, the death of thousands, you need to understand what happened 2 years earlier, when fate and a storm conspired to put Harold Godwinson at William's mercy. Picture it, 1064, the English Channel churning with one of those sudden tempests that mariners fear more than death itself, and Harold's ship, caught in the fury, sails shredding, crew screaming prayers to saints who seem deaf to their terror, driven onto the Norman coast like a piece of driftwood. Harold, the most powerful earl in England, second only to the childless King Edward, washes ashore not as a dignitary but as a prisoner, because in medieval Europe, shipwrecked nobility meant ransom, meant leverage, meant opportunity. Count Guy of Ponthieu, the local lord, seizes Harold immediately, already calculating the fortune he'll demand for an English earl's freedom. But William hears of Harold's capture and sees something Count Guy cannot, sees not just ransom but possibility, not just gold but the future itself. William rides to Ponthieu with an army at his back and a proposition on his lips. Release Harold to me, and I'll compensate you handsomely. Guy, wise enough not to argue with a man who commands Normandy's finest knights, agrees. And so Harold finds himself in William's court, treated not as a prisoner but as a guest, as a friend even, given fine rooms, fine food, fine hunting, and slowly, methodically, William begins to weave his web. They ride together through Norman forests, their horses kicking up autumn leaves that smell of earth and decay. They feast together in William's great hall, where boar meat glistens with fat and wine flows like rivers. William shows Harold his castles, his soldiers, his strength, and all the while he talks, always talking about King Edward, about England's future, about the fact that Edward has no heir, about the sacred duty to maintain order, prevent civil war, protect the realm. And then, one evening, after a particularly successful hunt where they brought down a magnificent stag together, William makes his move. The chapel is small, intimate, lit by candles that cast shadows dancing across stone walls like demons waiting to witness something terrible. Harold stands before an altar covered in reliquaries, boxes containing the bones of saints, the physical remains of holiness itself, and William's voice is gentle, reasonable, the voice of a friend asking for something small, something simple. "Swear to me, Harold. Swear that when King Edward dies, you will support my claim to England's throne. Edward promised it to me years ago. You know this, everyone knows this, I am his cousin, I have the rightful claim, all I ask is your support, your friendship, your oath." Harold hesitates. You can see it in the sources, in the Bayeux tapestries' embroidered images, in the chronicles written by monks who heard the stories from men who were there. He hesitates because he knows what this means, knows that England's nobles will want one of their own, knows his own ambition whispers dangerous things in his ear at night. But what choice does he have? He's in Normandy, surrounded by Norman soldiers, technically still a prisoner no matter how gilded the cage, and William's hand rests casually on his sword hilt, the gesture subtle but clear. So Harold places his hands on the reliquaries, feels the cold metal against his palms, feels the weight of history and heaven pressing down on his shoulders, and he swears. He swears before God and the saints to support William's claim. The oath echoes in that small chapel like a death sentence that just doesn't know its victim yet. William smiles, embraces Harold like a brother, and Harold returns to England bearing gifts from Normandy and a chain around his soul he doesn't yet fully understand. Now we return to that beach, to September 1066, to William holding that crumpled message and facing a choice that will define his entire life. His nobles gather around him, battle-hardened men who fought beside him since they were boys, who carved Normandy from chaos and rebellion, and they speak the brutal truth. "My lord, you cannot be serious. Invade England? Across the Channel? The logistics alone, building a fleet, gathering forces from across France, the cost, and even if we land, Harold commands the finest army in Europe, the housecarls, warriors who train from childhood, who can hold a shield wall that's never been broken, it's madness." Count Robert of Morton, William's other half-brother, speaks plainly. "You'll get us all killed for pride." The words hang in the salt air, and for a moment, you can see William waver, see the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, because he's not just risking his own life, he's asking 600 knights, their families, their retainers, thousands of men to gamble everything on his wounded honor. But then his jaw sets, his eyes harden, and when he speaks, his voice carries the absolute certainty of a man who's decided to bend reality to his will or die trying. Pride? This is not pride. This is justice. Harold swore an oath before God Almighty. He swore on the bones of saints. In breaking that oath, he has damned his own soul, but more than that, he has proven himself unworthy of kingship. A king must be a man of his word, or he is nothing. I will not let an oath-breaker sit on England's throne. I will not let him mock the sacred bonds that hold our world together. We sail for England, not for conquest, but for righteousness. God himself will be our judge. It's a magnificent speech, the kind that makes men forget their fear and remember only glory, and you can feel the energy shift, feel his nobles starting to nod, starting to believe, starting to see themselves not as invaders but as holy warriors correcting a cosmic wrong. The preparations begin immediately, and they're staggering in scope. William sends messengers across France, to Brittany, to Flanders, to every knight who's ever owed him a favor or sought his friendship, and his message is simple. I am crossing the Channel to claim what is rightfully mine. Come with me and share in the glory, stay behind and be forgotten by history. The response exceeds his wildest expectations. Knights arrive from across the continent, younger sons with no inheritance, ambitious warriors seeking land and title, mercenaries who fight for gold but are swayed by William's absolute conviction that God is on his side. 700 ships need building, and Normandy's forests echo with axes biting into wood, with hammers driving pegs, with the sound of an invasion fleet taking shape through sheer force of will. But William's masterstroke, the move that transforms this from a reckless gamble into a holy crusade, comes when he sends an embassy to Pope Alexander II in Rome. His message carefully crafted. Harold is an oath breaker, a man who swore before God and then spat on that oath, a man unworthy of kingship, I seek only what was promised to me, what King Edward himself designated as my right. I ask the Church's blessing not for conquest but for justice." And Pope Alexander, perhaps swayed by the theological argument, perhaps by the substantial donations William has made over the years, perhaps by his own political calculations about having a grateful king in England, sends his blessing in the form of a papal banner, a sacred standard that says God himself approves this invasion. William has his justification, his moral high ground, his holy cause, and now nothing can stop him. By late September, everything is ready. The ships, the men, the supplies, 600 elite Norman knights at the core, each one worth 10 ordinary soldiers, each one mounted on warhorses bred for battle, trained since childhood in the devastating cavalry charge that has made Norman arms feared across Europe. The beaches fill with soldiers, with horses being coaxed onto ships, with the organized chaos of an army preparing to cross the sea and gamble everything on a single throw of the dice. William walks among them, touching shoulders, speaking names, his presence alone worth 100 speeches, and then, on September 28th, as dawn breaks over the channel, he gives the order. The ships launch, 700 vessels turning the sea into a forest of masts and sails, and William stands in the prow of his flagship, the Mora, the papal banners streaming above him, and for better or worse, for glory or damnation, there is no turning back now. The crossing takes all day, the channel mercifully calm as if even the elements recognize the weight of this moment, and as the sun begins to set, painting the sky red as the blood that's coming, the white cliffs of England rise from the horizon like a challenge, like a promise, like destiny itself. They land at Pevensey Bay, ships crunching onto shingle beaches, knights disembarking with weapons ready for battle, expecting Harold's army to be waiting, expecting slaughter on the beach itself, but there's nothing, no one, just empty shore and the sound of waves and seabirds crying overhead like mourners at a funeral that hasn't happened yet. William's scouts bring news that explains the impossible gift fate has given them. Harold is 300 miles north, fighting a completely different invasion, because Harold Hardrada of Norway has landed in Yorkshire with his own claim to the English throne, and Harold, loyal to England if nothing else, has marched his army north at killing speed to defend his kingdom. William has his beachhead, but now comes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life, that will reveal the darkness lurking beneath his righteous crusade. His advisors gather in a commandeered Saxon hall, and the question is simple: what now? William's answer is calculated, ruthless, necessary by medieval standards but monstrous by any human measure. Burn the villages. Take the livestock. Destroy the harvest. Harold must know we're here, must know his kingdom bleeds while he's in the north. Make him come to us. Make him force march his army south. Make him arrive exhausted and desperate. That's how we win. And so Norman soldiers spread across the Sussex countryside, torches in hand, and the screams begin, villages burning, families fleeing, destruction spreading like plague across the land William claims he's come to rightfully rule. A Saxon woman, her hair gray with age, her face carved with wrinkles earned through decades of survival, stands before William as his men burn her village behind her, smoke rising into the autumn sky. She doesn't plead, doesn't beg, just looks at him with eyes that see right through his rationalizations and speaks words that will echo in his skull for years to come. What kind of king burns his own future kingdom? What kind of savior brings hell to the people he claims to protect? You're not here for justice, Norman. You're here for pride. And pride, as the Bible tells us, comes before destruction. William orders his guards to let her go, watches her walk away into the smoke, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, he wonders if she's right, if maybe he's crossed a line he can never uncross, if maybe this crusade for righteousness has already made him into something he never meant to become. But there's no time for doubt, no space for conscience, because a messenger arrives with news that changes everything. Harold has won. In the north, at Stamford Bridge, Harold's army shattered the Norwegian invasion, killed Harold Hardrada, slaughtered thousands of Viking warriors, and won one of the most decisive victories in English military history. But rather than celebrate, rather than rest, rather than give his exhausted soldiers even a week to recover, Harold has made his decision, the same decision that will ultimately seal his fate. He's force marching south, 250 miles in 5 days, driving his men to the edge of collapse because his kingdom is burning and William of Normandy waits on English soil with an army that should not be there, that must not be allowed to stay. The two forces are racing toward collision now. Harold pushing his men beyond human endurance, William consolidating his position and preparing his cavalry for the battle that will decide not just crowns but the entire future of the English people, their language, their culture, their identity as a nation. October 14, 1066, approaches like a storm on the horizon, inevitable, terrible, magnificent in its awful certainty. William's knights prepare their armor, sharpen their swords, pray to saints for victory and forgiveness in equal measure. Horses are fed, watered, groomed for battle, because in medieval warfare, a knight without his warhorse is just a man in metal, vulnerable, mortal, doomed. The papal banner flies over William's camp, a reminder that God supposedly approves this invasion, this violence, this breaking of a kingdom on the wheel of one man's wounded pride. And William, standing in his tent as night falls before the battle that will define his life, stares at that crumpled message that started everything, that announcement of Harold's coronation, of the broken oath, of the betrayal that justified an invasion. He thinks about that Saxon woman's question, about what kind of king burns his future kingdom, about whether righteousness can be measured in burning villages and dead children and crops destroyed before harvest. He thinks about Harold, probably less than 10 miles away now, probably unable to sleep either, probably thinking about his own choices, his own oaths, his own transformation from loyal earl to king to oathbreaker to defender of a realm that's about to be tested like never before. Tomorrow, one of them will die or wish they had. Tomorrow, the fate of England will be written in blood on the fields near Hastings. Tomorrow, history pivots on a single moment of violence that will echo through centuries. But here, tonight, in the last hours of peace before the slaughter begins, William asks himself the question that matters most, the question that will define whether he's a righteous king or a magnificent monster, whether his claim to justice is real or just pride wrapped in holy robes, whether Harold's broken oath justifies the thousands who will die because of it. The candles in his tent flicker, casting shadows that look like ghosts of battles yet to come, and William, Duke of Normandy, holy crusader or ruthless invader depending on who tells the story, prepares to find out what God actually thinks about broken oaths, righteous anger, and the price of a crown. So before we see the sun rise on the most famous battle in English history, before we watch cavalry charge and arrows fly and a kingdom hang in the balance, answer this question for yourself. Was William justified? When someone breaks a sacred oath, when they betray a promise made before God himself, how far can you go to set things right? Is any throne worth the burning villages? Is any crown worth the price it demands from the innocent? Drop your answer in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you're watching from, because this question, this choice between justice and mercy, between righteousness and ruthlessness, between honor and humanity, is as relevant today as it was 960 years ago on that bloody October day. October 13, 1066, and Harold Godwinson's army arrives at Senlac Hill like a force of nature collapsing in on itself, 250 miles covered in 5 days, men whose feet bleed through their boots, whose legs shake with exhaustion so profound it borders on hallucination, whose eyes burn with the kind of fatigue that makes the world seem unreal, distant, like watching your own life through thick glass. Harold rides at their head, his face carved from granite and determination, and when he sees the ridge, that perfect defensive position overlooking the valley where William's Norman forces have made camp, something like hope flickers in his chest for the first time since he received word that the bastard Duke had landed on English soil. This hill, this ground, this is where England will be saved or lost, and Harold knows with the certainty of a warrior who has survived a dozen battles that if his men can hold this position, if they can maintain their shield wall on this high ground, then William's cavalry, those 600 elite knights everyone fears like demons from hell itself, will break themselves against English steel like waves against cliffs. But there's a problem Harold doesn't fully see yet, a crack in his certainty that will widen into a chasm that swallows everything, because 5 days of forced marching has done something terrible to his army, has transformed his elite housecarls from the finest warriors in Europe into men running on nothing but pride and fury and the rapidly depleting reserves of human endurance. Harold's brother Geich finds him as the sun sets, painting the sky the color of old blood, and speaks the words no commander wants to hear on the eve of battle. "Brother, the men are destroyed. Half of them can barely stand. We lost a third of our forces at Stamford Bridge. We've had no time to rest, no time to gather reinforcements from the southern shires, and William's army is fresh, fed, eager. They've been waiting for us while we've been dying by inches on the road south." Gh's voice cracks with exhaustion and something deeper, something that sounds like premonition, like he can see the future and it's painted in English blood. "Wait, just wait 3 days, let the men rest, let reinforcements arrive, let William grow impatient and make a mistake. We have the advantage of position but not of strength. Not yet, please Harold, please wait." And Harold turns to his brother, this man he's known since childhood, this warrior who has never shown fear in battle, and sees tears cutting tracks through the dirt on Gh's face, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, Harold considers it, considers waiting, considers giving his men the rest they so desperately need. But then Harold thinks about the villages burning, about the Saxon families fleeing before Norman torches, about how every day he waits is another day William consolidates his position, builds fortifications, spreads his forces across Sussex like a cancer, and Harold's jaw sets with the terrible certainty of a man who has decided that tomorrow, right or wrong, ready or not, this ends. "We fight at dawn." William thinks himself righteous because of an oath I swore under duress. An oath extracted through coercion when I was his prisoner in all but name. I am England's anointed king, crowned by her bishops, chosen by her nobles, and no Norman bastard will take that from me while I still draw breath. Tell the men to rest tonight. Tell them tomorrow we defend our homeland. Tell them tomorrow we show these continental invaders what English steel tastes like. It's a magnificent speech, the kind that should inspire confidence, but Gay just nods slowly, the gesture of a man who's already started saying goodbye to life, and walks away into the gathering darkness to deliver orders that might be death sentences for thousands. In the Norman camp, 300 yards away across the valley, William can't sleep, hasn't slept properly in days, because the weight of what he's done, what he's about to do, sits on his chest like a physical thing, crushing the air from his lungs. He stands outside his tent watching the English campfires burning on the ridge above, counting them, trying to estimate Harold's numbers, trying to calculate odds that refuse to be favorable no matter how he arranges them in his mind. His half-brother Odo finds him there, still wearing his bishop's robes despite the battle armor underneath, the combination of holy and martial that somehow perfectly captures the twisted logic of medieval warfare where God supposedly picks sides in slaughter. "You should rest, William. Tomorrow requires you at your best." But William shakes his head, his voice hoarse when he finally speaks. "Odo, what if I'm wrong? What if this whole crusade, this invasion justified by a broken oath, what if it's just pride? That Saxon woman asked me what kind of king burns his future kingdom, and I can't stop thinking about it, can't stop seeing her face, can't stop wondering if maybe Harold had good reasons to break that oath, maybe being England's king meant more than a promise extracted under coercion." Odo's response is swift, sharp, the voice of a man who cannot afford doubt on the eve of battle. "You cannot think like that. Not now. Not when 600 knights have followed you across the channel, when thousands of men have gambled everything on your claim, when Pope Alexander himself has blessed this enterprise." Harold swore an oath before God, William. Before God. The moment he broke that oath, he forfeited any claim to righteousness, any claim to legitimacy. Tomorrow you fight not for pride but for the sacred order of things, for the principle that oaths mean something, that honor matters, that a man's word is the foundation of civilization itself. Harold chose to break that foundation. You're simply dealing with the consequences. It's exactly what William needs to hear, exactly the reassurance that lets him breathe again, that lets him believe for another few hours that he's righteous rather than monstrous, but somewhere deep in his soul, in a place he can't quite silence, that Saxon woman's question still echoes like a prophecy. October 14th, 1066, and dawn breaks cold and clear over Senlac Hill, the kind of perfect autumn morning that seems designed by fate itself to witness something significant, something terrible, something that will echo through centuries. 9 in the morning, and William orders his forces forward, 7,000 men moving across the valley in 3 divisions, Bretons on the left, Normans in the center, French and Flemish on the right, a wall of armor and spears and horses that should inspire terror in any enemy. But Harold's English stand firm on the ridge, their shield wall already formed, 2,000 housecarls in mail armor with those massive Danish axes that can split a horse in half, backed by 5,000 Cavalry, the militia soldiers who are farmers and craftsmen most days but warriors when England calls. The shield wall, that ancient defensive formation that has saved English armies for generations, stands solid as stone, shields overlapping, axes ready, and Harold walks behind his lines speaking words of encouragement that are swallowed by the sound of Norman war horns echoing across the valley like the voice of doom itself. The first Norman cavalry charge hits the shield wall at 9:30 a.m., and it's like watching the sea attack the shore, magnificent and terrible and ultimately futile. 600 Norman knights, each one a warrior trained since childhood, each one mounted on a warhorse bred specifically for battle, crash into the English line with the full weight of horseflesh and armor and weapons designed to break men's bodies and spirits simultaneously. The sound is indescribable, metal on metal, screams human and animal mixing into a symphony of violence that drowns out thought itself, and for a moment it seems like the Norman charge must succeed, must break through, must shatter the English line, because how could anything human stand against such force? But the shield wall holds. English axes rise and fall with mechanical precision, cutting through armor, through flesh, through horses' legs, and Norman knights who moments ago seemed invincible tumble from their mounts and are crushed under English feet or finished with swift axe blows that show no mercy, because this is war and mercy is a luxury neither side can afford. William watches his first charge fail, watches his knights retreat in disorder, watches his Breton division on the left actually break and run, fleeing back down the hill in panic that spreads like disease through the ranks, and for a terrible moment he thinks it's over, thinks his entire invasion, his righteous crusade, his God-blessed mission to claim what's his, is about to collapse into disaster and death and historical footnote. And then, catastrophically for Harold, beautifully for William, something happens that changes everything. The English, seeing the Bretons flee, seeing Norman knights in disarray, seeing what looks like victory within grasp, do the one thing Harold has spent the entire morning ordering them not to do. They break formation. Hundreds of Feigned soldiers, these militia warriors who lack the discipline of professional housecarls, charge down the hill after the fleeing Bretons, axes raised, victory songs on their lips, completely abandoning the defensive position that was their only advantage, turning themselves from an impregnable wall into scattered individuals vulnerable to the very cavalry tactics they had been successfully defending against. Harold sees it happening, and his roar of fury can be heard across the battlefield. Hold the line. Stay on the ridge. Hold the damn line. But it's too late. The Feigned are committed, are racing down the hill after enemies they think are defeated, and William, standing in his stirrups, sees the opportunity with the clarity of a predator spotting wounded prey. His voice cuts through the chaos like a blade through silk. Wheel about. Turn and slaughter them. The Breton retreat, which might have been genuine panic or might have been accidental genius, transforms into a trap, and Norman cavalry pivots with practiced ease, catches the pursuing English in open ground where their axes mean nothing and Norman lances mean everything, and the slaughter begins. English soldiers die by the dozens, by the hundreds, cut down in the valley far from the safety of the ridge, and the survivors who manage to scramble back up the hill find the shield wall weakened, gaps appearing where men used to stand, the perfect defensive position suddenly looking fragile, mortal, breakable. But it's not enough, not yet, because the English line still holds, Harold still commands the high ground, and his housecarls, those elite professional warriors, haven't broken, haven't panicked, stand firm as bedrock around their king. Noon arrives and the battle has become a grinding war of attrition, Norman cavalry charging uphill again and again, throwing themselves against English shields in waves of violence that achieve nothing except adding bodies to the growing piles of dead and dying that carpet the hillside. William's knights are exhausted, their horses are exhausted, and whispers begin to spread through the Norman ranks, whispers that sound like defeat, like maybe this was madness after all, Like maybe the English shield wall truly is unbreakable and they should retreat to their ships while they still can. And then, around 1 in the afternoon, a rumor starts spreading faster than fire through dry grass. William is dead. Someone saw him fall from his horse, saw him buried under English soldiers, saw the end of everything right there in the blood-soaked grass of a hill in Sussex. The Norman army begins to disintegrate, begins to pull back, begins to lose the cohesion that's kept them fighting for 4 hours. And if William actually were dead, this would be the end. This would be the moment the invasion collapses and Harold wins and history takes a completely different path. But William is not dead, is furious rather than fallen, and he does something that becomes legend, something that gets embroidered into the Bayeux tapestry and written into chronicles and remembered for centuries. He rips off his helmet, rides to the front of his army, his face visible to every soldier who thought him dead, and screams with the voice of a man who refuses to let fate dictate outcomes. "Look at me. I live. And while I live, we fight. God has not brought us across the channel to fail on this hill. He has not blessed our banner to see it dragged through English mud. Harold broke his oath before God Almighty, and God will deliver him into our hands. Advance." It's pure theater, pure leadership distilled to its essence, the power of one man's certainty imposing order on chaos, and the Norman army, which was on the verge of routing, steadies, reforms, prepares to charge again. But William knows something now that he didn't know before, knows it with the certainty of a gambler who's finally found the winning strategy. The English will break formation if they think they see victory. They've done it once, they'll do it again, which means the solution is simple, brutal, and perfect. He gathers his commanders, his voice low and urgent. Feigned retreat. Order the cavalry to charge, engage, then flee in apparent panic. Make it convincing, make the English think we're beaten, make them chase us down the hill, and when they do, when they abandon their position, we turn and we slaughter them. It's our only chance. His commanders nod, understanding immediately, but one of them, Robert of Beaumont, speaks the question everyone's thinking. "My lord, asking cavalry to pretend to flee, to act like cowards, it's asking them to perform the most shameful act imaginable. What if they actually flee? What if the pretense becomes reality?" And William's smile is cold as winter sea. "Then we lose and die and are forgotten. But they won't actually flee, because they're Norman knights, and Norman knights would rather die than be thought cowards. Their pride is our weapon. Use it." The feigned retreat is executed with perfection that borders on art, Norman cavalry charging up the hill, engaging the English line with furious intensity, and then, as if breaking under pressure, turning and fleeing down the slope in what appears to be complete disorder. And Harold, from his position in the center of the English line, sees it happening and screams himself hoarse, trying to prevent the inevitable. "It's a trap. Stay on the ridge. Do not pursue. Stay in formation." But human nature, the intoxicating lure of victory, the desire to finish an enemy who appears beaten, proves stronger than discipline, stronger than orders, stronger than the wisdom of a king who knows exactly what's about to happen because he can see the pattern, can see history repeating itself from 2 hours ago. Hundreds more English soldiers break ranks, charge down the hill after the fleeing Normans, and William's voice rings out across the valley like a judgment from God himself. "Now, turn and kill them all." The Norman cavalry wheels about with practiced precision, and what was a retreat becomes an ambush, becomes a slaughter, becomes the moment the battle pivots from uncertain to inevitable. English soldiers caught in open ground die in windrows, cut down by lances and swords and horses' hooves, and every man who falls weakens the shield wall further, creates another gap, another vulnerability, another place where Norman steel can penetrate. 3 o'clock in the afternoon and Harold's line is fraying, not broken but stressed beyond endurance, held together by nothing but the will of the housecarls who've been fighting for 6 hours straight and the desperate fury of a king watching his kingdom bleed. William orders another attack, and another, keeps the pressure relentless, gives Harold no time to reform, no time to strengthen his defenses, no time for anything except the grinding horror of combat that slowly, inevitably, devours men's strength and courage and hope. And then William does something that medieval commanders rarely do. something that shows either genius or desperation or perhaps both. He orders his archers to change their angle of fire. All morning the Norman arrows have been flying straight into the English shield wall where they're blocked by overlapping shields and accomplish nothing except wasting ammunition. But now, as the sun begins its descent toward evening, William orders the archers to aim high, to send their arrows arcing up into the sky so they fall down onto the English position from above, plunging from the heavens like God's own judgment, bypassing the shields that have protected Harold's men all day, striking heads and shoulders and faces tilted upward to see where death comes from. The sky darkens with arrows, thousands of shafts blotting out the sun, and English soldiers look up and see their doom falling toward them, and there's nothing they can do, nowhere to hide, just the awful moment of waiting for steel to find flesh. Harold stands in the center of his line, rallying his men, shouting encouragement that's barely audible over the screams and the clash of weapons and the death rattles of two armies destroying each other, and perhaps he looks up at exactly the wrong moment. Perhaps fate has simply decided his time is finished. Perhaps the arrow that strikes him in the face is random chance or divine intervention depending on your theology, but regardless of cause the effect is undeniable. England's king staggers backward, an arrow protruding from his eye socket, blood pouring down his face in a scarlet sheet, and every English soldier who sees it feels their courage drain away like water from a broken vessel. Harold, incredibly, doesn't die, not immediately, pulls the arrow from his own eye with hands that shake but don't falter, continues to stand, continues to fight, because what else is there to do when your kingdom hangs in the balance and death is already certain, and the only question left is whether you face it like a king or like a coward. William sees Harold's wound from across the battlefield, sees the moment English morale begins to crack, sees victory finally within grasp after 7 hours of brutal combat that's killed thousands and wounded everyone who survives. He orders a final all-out assault, every remaining knight, every soldier who can still stand, throwing everything into one last desperate push to break the English line before darkness falls and Harold's reinforcements arrive, and this entire invasion becomes a costly failure. The Norman charge hits the weakened English shield wall like a battering ram against a rotting door, and this time, finally, catastrophically, the line breaks. Gaps become breaches, become complete collapse, and Norman knights pour through into the center of the English position where Harold still stands, half-blind, surrounded by the few remaining housecarls who have chosen to die with their king rather than live in a conquered England. What happens next depends on which chronicle you read, which tapestry you examine, which version of history you believe, but the end result is the same. Harold Godwinson, King of England, last of the Anglo-Saxon monarchs, dies on Senlac Hill as the sun sets on October 14, 1066. Cut down by Norman swords or trampled by Norman horses or simply collapsing from wounds and exhaustion and the weight of watching his kingdom die around him. William finds Harold's body later, among the piles of dead that carpet the hillside like some obscene harvest, and something strange happens, something the chronicles mention but don't quite explain. William covers Harold's body respectfully, orders it treated with honor, even sheds tears according to some accounts, tears for an enemy, tears for a fellow warrior, or perhaps tears for the realization that he's won the battle but not the war, conquered a position but not a kingdom, proven himself righteous in combat but not in conscience. The English survivors retreat into the forest as darkness falls, not routed but withdrawn, not surrendering but regrouping, and William stands on Senlac Hill surrounded by 7,000 corpses, English and Norman intermingled in death as they never were in life, and surveys his victory that tastes like ash and copper and regret. His knights celebrate, exhausted men embracing and weeping with relief and joy that they've survived, that they've won, that England is theirs for the taking. But William doesn't celebrate, stands silent among the dead, and when Odo approaches with congratulations on his lips, William's voice is hollow, emptied of triumph. What have I won, brother? A battlefield soaked in blood? 7,000 dead for one man's broken oath? Harold lies there among his warriors, brave to the end, loyal to his kingdom to the last breath, and I'm supposed to feel righteous? I'm supposed to believe God blessed this slaughter? Odo has no answer, or perhaps he does but knows William isn't ready to hear it, so they stand together in the gathering darkness surrounded by the price of righteousness, the cost of honor, the terrible mathematics of medieval justice where one broken oath equals thousands of broken bodies. And as the first stars appear above Senlac Hill, as the sounds of battle fade into the moans of the wounded and dying, as the crows begin to gather for their feast, one question hangs in the cold October air like smoke from burning villages. William has won the battle, proven his military genius, demonstrated that God apparently favored his cause enough to deliver victory against superior defensive position and desperate English courage. But has he won anything that matters? Has breaking Harold won him England, or has it simply won him the right to spend years fighting a guerrilla war against a population that will never forgive, never forget, never truly accept a Norman king who came with fire and sword to claim a throne one man swore to support under what Harold clearly believed was coercion? Is victory in battle the same as victory in war? Or has William simply won the right to discover that conquering a nation is the easy part, ruling it is where the real nightmare begins? Think about it. If you were Harold on that hill, wounded, dying, watching your kingdom collapse, would you regret breaking that oath? Or would you regret not breaking it sooner, not standing up to William when he first extracted it under duress? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what honor means when it conflicts with duty, when keeping your word destroys your kingdom, when the choice is between being an oath keeper and being a king. And tell us where you're watching from, because this question, this impossible choice between conflicting loyalties, between personal honor and national survival, is as relevant now as it was on that blood-soaked hill 960 years ago. So William has won, right? The battle is over. Harold lies dead among his housecarls. The English army has scattered into the forests of Sussex like seeds scattered by a violent wind, and the Duke of Normandy stands victorious on a hill carpeted with 7,000 corpses that are already beginning to stiffen in the cold October night. Victory, conquest, divine judgment delivered through superior tactics and Norman steel. The papal banner still flies above the battlefield, God's supposed blessing made manifest in blood and broken bodies, and William should feel triumphant, should feel vindicated, should feel like justice has been served and righteousness has prevailed. But here's the question that will haunt William for the next 20 years, the question that transforms this from a simple conquest story into something far more complex and troubling. When does winning the battle become losing your soul? When does righteous vengeance transform into something darker, something that even victory cannot redeem? Because what happens next, in the weeks and months and years after Senlac Hill, will prove that conquering England was the easy part, and that the real price of that broken oath hasn't even begun to be paid. October 15, 1066, dawn breaks over a battlefield that looks like hell's anteroom, and William's first task as conqueror is the grimmest imaginable, identifying and disposing of the dead. Norman priests move among the corpses offering last rites, searching for nobles whose bodies can be returned to their families, while common soldiers are dragged to mass graves that will be filled before the sun reaches its zenith. William personally searches for Harold's body, finds it eventually identified by tattoos on the torso because the face is too damaged to recognize, destroyed by that arrow and the subsequent violence of hand-to-hand combat. And here's where something interesting happens, something that reveals the complexity buried beneath William's armor of righteousness. He orders Harold's body treated with honor, wrapped in purple cloth, the color of royalty, and according to some chronicles he weeps, standing over the corpse of his enemy, the oathbreaker, the man whose betrayal justified this entire invasion. Are they tears of triumph? Grief? Guilt? The sources don't say, but William orders Harold buried in secret, without ceremony, because even in death Harold remains dangerous, remains a potential rallying point for English resistance, remains more powerful as a symbol than he ever was as flesh and blood. The Norman army begins its march toward London, but slowly, cautiously, because winning one battle doesn't mean winning a kingdom, and William knows with the certainty of a man who spent his entire life fighting that England has barely begun to bleed. The English nobility, those earls and thanes who survived Senlac Hill, retreat to London and convene an emergency witan, the council that traditionally chooses English kings, and their decision is swift and predictable. They elect Edgar Atheling, the teenage grandson of Edmund Ironside, the last living male with a blood claim to the English throne. It's a desperate move, elevating a boy with no military experience and no real power base, But it's also a statement, a defiance, a declaration that England will choose her own king even if that king is a symbolic figurehead rather than a practical leader. William receives news of Edgar's election while camped at Dover, and his response is measured, cold, inevitable. They reject my rightful claim? They spit on God's judgment delivered on the battlefield? Then they will learn what rejection costs. Dover Castle falls after minimal resistance, William's engineers already beginning the work that will define his conquest, building castles, those Norman fortifications that the landscape like stone tumors, each one a permanent garrison, a base for controlling the surrounding territory, a reminder carved in rock that the Normans are here to stay. The castle-building strategy is genius in its brutality, because each fortress requires English labor, English resources, English submission to Norman architectural domination of their own landscape, and the psychological impact of watching foreign castles rise on English soil proves almost as devastating as military defeat. William marches through Kent, through Surrey, circling London rather than attacking it directly, cutting off the city's supply lines, isolating Edgar and his supporters, demonstrating that he can take London whenever he chooses but prefers to let hunger and despair do the work of swords and arrows. And it works, because by early December, barely 2 months after Senlac Hill, the English nobility cave, the resistance crumbles, and Edgar Atheling, this teenage would-be king, leads a delegation to Berkhamsted to offer William the crown of England. It should be a moment of triumph, the culmination of the crusade, the vindication of every decision William made since that September morning when he received news of Harold's coronation. But when Edgar kneels before William and offers submission, when Archbishop Ealdred steps forward with the crown of England gleaming in the winter sunlight, William feels nothing, or perhaps he feels everything, the weight of all those dead at Senlac Hill, all those burning villages, all those decisions that seemed necessary at the time but in retrospect look suspiciously like the actions of a man consumed by pride rather than guided by righteousness. He accepts the crown, accepts the submission, but something in his eyes suggests he's already beginning to understand what that Saxon woman warned him about, that conquering a kingdom and ruling a kingdom are two entirely different things, and one does not necessarily prepare you for the other. Christmas Day, 1066, Westminster Abbey, and William the Bastard becomes William the King in a coronation ceremony that should mark the end of the story, should represent the moment when the Norman Conquest becomes complete and England accepts her new ruler and everyone lives happily ever after in that medieval way where happily means without major rebellions or famines. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn, where the consequences of every choice William made since crossing the Channel begin to compound into something monstrous. The coronation itself descends into chaos when Norman guards stationed outside the abbey hear shouting from within, mistake the celebratory cries for an attack, and in panic set fire to nearby buildings. The ceremony continues inside while London burns outside, and William, standing at the altar with the crown of England on his head and smoke seeping under the doors, experiences what might be the first moment of true clarity since this entire enterprise began. He's not England's righteous king, he's England's conqueror, and the English will never, can never, will not ever truly accept him, will spend the rest of his reign looking for opportunities to drive a knife between his ribs or poison in his cup or rebellion in every shire and county across the kingdom. And they do, because 1067 brings the first wave of rebellions, scattered, disorganized, but persistent as infection in a wound that won't heal. Exeter rebels, and William besieges it for 18 days before the city submits. The Welsh borders erupt in violence as Welsh princes see opportunity in English chaos. Northumbria, that wild northern kingdom that's always been barely English anyway, rejects Norman authority entirely, and William sends armies north that accomplish nothing except burning villages and killing peasants while the actual rebels melt into the countryside like morning mist. Each rebellion requires response, each response requires soldiers, each deployment of soldiers requires castles to garrison them, and slowly, methodically, William transforms England into an occupied nation, foreign troops in every major town, Norman lords replacing English thanes, an entire people dispossessed in their own homeland, and with each new castle, each new garrison, each new Norman sheriff imposing foreign law on English subjects, the resentment grows deeper, harder, more impossible to ever truly resolve. 1068, and the rebellions intensify, become coordinated, start to threaten William's entire hold on England. Northern England rises under Edgar Atheling, that teenage claimant who never stopped believing the crown should be his, joined by the powerful Earls Guspatrick and Waltheof and Morcar, men with armies and resources and legitimate grievances. William marches north with overwhelming force, scatters the rebels, builds castles at York and Nottingham and Lincoln, installs Norman garrisons, and thinks the problem solved. But here's what William doesn't understand yet, what his Norman mindset of direct confrontation and decisive battle cannot grasp. The English aren't fighting a conventional war anymore, they're fighting a guerrilla war, hitting supply convoys and isolated garrisons, burning Norman crops, assassinating Norman officials, making the cost of occupation so high that eventually, surely, William will decide England isn't worth the price and sail back to Normandy with whatever plunder he can carry. It's a strategy born of desperation but also of deep cultural understanding, the English instinct that outlasting your enemy is sometimes more effective than defeating them, that making yourself indigestible is a form of victory even if it doesn't look like triumph. 1069, and everything explodes simultaneously, as if every simmering resentment across England decided at the same moment that this is the year, this is when the Normans get driven into the sea, this is when England reclaims herself from foreign occupation. A massive Danish fleet arrives on the east coast, 240 ships carrying an entire army under King Sweyn II of Denmark, who has his own claim to the English throne and sees opportunity in English resistance. The Danish landing triggers coordinated rebellions across the north. York falls to combined English-Danish forces, the Norman garrison is slaughtered in the streets, and suddenly, shockingly, William's entire conquest hangs by a thread, because if the northern rebels can link up with the Welsh princes and the southwestern resistance and maintain Danish naval support, then England might actually be lost, might actually slip through Norman fingers despite that victory at Senlac Hill 3 years ago that was supposed to decide everything. William's response will define his legacy, will determine whether history remembers him as a righteous king or a monstrous tyrant, will answer once and for all that Saxon woman's question about what kind of king burns his future kingdom. He marches north in winter, through snow and ice and conditions that kill men and horses through exposure before any battle is fought, and when he reaches Yorkshire, when he sees the scale of the rebellion, when he understands that northern England will never submit, will never accept Norman rule, will fight forever unless something breaks their will permanently and completely, William makes a decision that will haunt English history for centuries. He orders the harrying of the North, a systematic campaign of destruction so total, so devastating, that it transforms genocide into policy, vengeance into strategy, conquest into apocalypse. The harrying lasts from winter 1069 through 1070, and the details are so horrific that even Norman chroniclers, men predisposed to view William favorably, describe it with horror and revulsion. William's armies spread across Yorkshire, Northumbria, Durham, every shire between York and the Scottish border, with orders that are simple and absolute: destroy everything. Burn crops, slaughter livestock, demolish tools and plows, poison wells, raze villages, kill anyone who resists and drive out anyone who doesn't, turn the entire north of England into a wasteland incapable of supporting human life, let alone supporting rebellion. And they do, with methodical Norman efficiency, village after village going up in flames, families fleeing into winter forests with no food and no shelter, starvation spreading like plague, bodies piling in ditches and fields and forests until the chronicler Orderic Vitalis estimates 100,000 dead, maybe more, from violence and starvation and exposure and disease. An entire generation of northern English erased from existence because they refused to accept a Norman king whose claim rested on nothing more substantial than an oath extracted under duress and victory won through superior cavalry tactics. William watches his armies destroy the north, and something dies inside him, some last vestige of the man who believed he was fighting for righteousness, for justice, for the sacred principle that oaths matter and honor means something. He stands in the ruins of York, surrounded by smoking rubble that used to be homes and shops and churches, and a priest approaches him, a Norman priest who should be on William's side, who should understand the necessity of crushing rebellion before it spreads, but instead the priest speaks words that will be recorded in multiple chronicles. Words that suggest even William's own supporters are beginning to question whether the cure has become worse than the disease. "My Lord King, what you have done here, this destruction, this slaughter, how will you answer for it when you stand before God's judgment?" Harold broke an oath, "Yes, but how many innocents have died to punish that one sin? How many children starved to satisfy your wounded pride? Is the crown of England worth 100,000 souls?" William has no answer, or perhaps his answer is written in the devastation surrounding them, in the smoke still rising from burned villages, in the bodies that won't all be buried until spring because the ground is frozen too hard to dig graves. He orders his army south, leaves the north to its winter of dying, and the Danish fleet, seeing the scorched earth policy, seeing that there's nothing left worth fighting for, takes William's bribe and sails home to Denmark, their invasion dissolved not through military defeat but through the simple calculation that a devastated England isn't worth conquering. The rebellions continue sporadically for another 2 years, but the harrying has broken something fundamental in English resistance, has demonstrated that William will pay any price, commit any atrocity, cross any moral line to maintain his grip on the crown, and gradually, not through acceptance but through exhaustion and terror and the recognition that further resistance means only more death, England submits. 1072, and the conquest is finally complete, not the conquest that took one afternoon at Senlac Hill but the real conquest, the long bloody grinding occupation that took 6 years and cost perhaps 150,000 lives when you count battlefield deaths and reprisals and the harrying and all the small anonymous violences that accumulate in the margins of historical record. William has his kingdom, undisputed now, consolidated through castle building and terror and the systematic replacement of English nobility with Norman lords who owe everything to William and therefore can be trusted to maintain his rule. The Domesday Book, that massive survey of English wealth and property compiled in 1086, tells the story in stark numbers. By William's death, only 2 major English landholders remain, everyone else dispossessed, their estates given to Norman barons, an entire aristocracy replaced in a generation. The most complete transfer of wealth and power in English history accomplished through the simple expedient of conquest and confiscation. But here's what the Domesday Book doesn't record, what no chronicle can fully capture. What this cost William himself, what it did to his soul, to his conscience, to his ability to look in a mirror and see anything resembling the righteous duke who crossed the channel in 1066 believing God was on his side. 1087, Rouen, Normandy, and William lies dying from injuries sustained when his horse stumbled and threw him against his saddle's pommel, a stupid accident that will kill a man who survived dozens of battles. And as death approaches, William does something remarkable, something that suggests all those years of violence and occupation and the harrying and the castles built on English suffering have weighed on him more heavily than he ever admitted. He dictates a deathbed confession that's recorded by multiple sources, words that amount to one of history's most devastating admissions of regret. "I treated the native inhabitants of England with unreasonable severity, cruelly oppressed high and low, unjustly disinherited many, and caused the death of thousands by starvation and war, especially in Yorkshire." It's an extraordinary confession, a king admitting on his deathbed that his reign, his conquest, his crusade justified by Harold's broken oath, was actually unreasonable severity, cruel oppression, unjust disinheritance, mass death caused by his own decisions and his own pride and his own inability to distinguish between justice and vengeance. William orders that his English prisoners be released, that his debts be forgiven, that churches be compensated for property seized during the conquest, as if these final acts of mercy can somehow balance the scales, can somehow redeem 20 years of brutality, can somehow make right what was broken that day in 1066 when he decided Harold's betrayal justified an invasion. But of course it can't, because the dead don't come back when you release prisoners, the starved don't unstarve when you forgive debts, the dispossessed don't regain their land when you compensate churches, and William dies knowing this, dies understanding that he won the crown but lost something far more valuable in the process. The funeral is chaos, a perfect metaphor for William's entire reign, because even in death he cannot find peace. His body is transported to Cannes for burial, but riots break out during the funeral procession. The church catches fire, and when they finally get William's body into the stone sarcophagus prepared for it, the corpse has swollen in the heat and won't fit, and when the attendants try to force it, they rupture William's abdomen, filling the church with such an unbearable stench that the funeral is rushed through in minutes and everyone flees gasping for fresh air. It's grotesque, undignified, almost comedic in its horror, and it seems somehow fitting that William the Conqueror, who transformed England through violence and terror and the systematic destruction of an entire culture, cannot even be buried with dignity, cannot even have death as an escape from the consequences of his choices. His sons fight over his empire before his body is cold, exactly as that Saxon woman might have predicted, because conquest built on pride and violence rarely produces lasting peace or smooth succession. Robert Curthose gets Normandy, William Rufus gets England, and Henry gets gold, and within years they're at war with each other, tearing apart what William spent his life building, proving that even military genius and ruthless efficiency cannot create stability when the foundation is soaked in blood and built on broken oaths and maintained through terror. The Norman Conquest survives. England remains under Norman rule. The language transforms as French words infiltrate English vocabulary. The culture shifts as Norman architecture and law and customs replace Anglo-Saxon traditions, but the kingdom William died ruling is not the kingdom he thought he was fighting for in 1066, not the righteous realm governed by a king whose claim rested on sacred oaths and divine favor, but rather a traumatized nation held together by castles and garrisons and the memory of what happens to those who resist. So here we are at the end of the story, and the question remains unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. Was William right? Did Harold's broken oath justify everything that followed? The invasion, the battle, the occupation, the harrying, the 150,000 dead, the complete dispossession of an entire people, the transformation of England from an independent kingdom into a conquered province? Medieval sources argue both sides. Norman chroniclers insisting William's claim was legitimate and Harold's oath-breaking forfeited any right to rule. English sources calling William a tyrant and a usurper whose entire reign was built on violence and foreign oppression. Modern historians tend to take a more measured view, acknowledging William's military genius and administrative skill while not flinching from the brutality of the conquest and the devastating impact on English society and culture. But perhaps the most honest answer comes from William himself, dying in Rouen in 1087, admitting that he treated England with unreasonable severity, that cruelty and oppression characterized his rule, that the cost in human suffering far exceeded any legitimate justification based on one man's broken oath. Because here's the truth that William learned too late, the lesson written in blood across 6 years of conquest and 20 years of occupation. Winning doesn't make you right. Victory doesn't equal righteousness. You can justify invasion with papal banners and broken oaths and theological arguments about the sanctity of promises made before God, but at the end of the day, when the bodies are counted and the villages are burned and the survivors are starving in winter forests, when you've destroyed an entire region to prevent rebellion and dispossessed a whole aristocracy to consolidate power, when you're dictating deathbed confessions about unreasonable severity and cruel oppression, maybe, just maybe, the oathbreaker wasn't the only villain in this story. Maybe Harold broke his oath for good reasons, saw that supporting William meant betraying England, chose national duty over personal honor and died defending his kingdom from foreign invasion. Or maybe Harold was an ambitious oathbreaker and William was a righteous avenger, and the truth is somewhere in the messy middle where most historical truth lies, complicated and contradictory and impossible to reduce to simple narratives of good versus evil. What William discovered, what the Norman Conquest teaches us across 960 years of historical distance, is that some victories cost more than their worth, that some crowns are bought at prices that can never be justified, that pride dressed in righteousness remains pride, and pride, as the Bible William claimed to be upholding tells us, comes before destruction. He got his crown, enforced his claim, proved that broken oaths have consequences, but the kingdom he won was not the kingdom he wanted, and the king he became was not the king he meant to be, and sometimes, perhaps, the most important battles are the ones we choose not to fight, the invasions we don't launch, the righteous vengeance we don't pursue because we're wise enough to understand that winning isn't everything, that justice and mercy sometimes matter more than honor, that being right About an oath means nothing if upholding that rightness requires becoming a monster. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this, to sit with the discomfort of it, to grapple with the complexity rather than reaching for easy answers. If you were William, standing on that Norman beach in September 1066, ships ready to sail, army gathered, papal banner flying, knowing everything you know now about what the next 20 years will bring, the battles and the harrying and the 100,000 dead and the deathbed confession, would you still cross the Channel? Would you still invade England to punish Harold's oath-breaking? Or would you recognize that some victories aren't worth their cost, that some crowns are purchased with currency no righteous person should be willing to spend? Drop your answer in the comments below, and more than that, tell me why. Tell me how you justify your choice, because this question, this impossible choice between honor and mercy, between righteous vengeance and practical wisdom, between winning at any cost and recognizing that some costs are too high, this question matters as much today as it did in 1066. And tell me where in the world you're watching from, because honor, culture, and oath-keeping and the price of conquest are universal human questions that transcend time and geography and culture. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about the impossible choices that shaped history, the moments when people faced decisions with no good options and had to choose anyway, the victories that felt like defeats and the defeats that somehow contained seeds of something better. Like this video if you appreciate storytelling that doesn't flinch from complexity, that acknowledges history's moral ambiguity, that treats people from the past as fully human rather than as cardboard heroes and villains. And share this with someone who needs to hear it, who needs to think about what we're willing to do for pride, for honor, for righteousness, for crowns, and whether sometimes the bravest thing isn't crossing the channel but staying home. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll dive into another moment when history pivoted on someone's choice, another story about the price of conquest, another question about what we're willing to sacrifice for what we claim to believe. Until then, think about William, think about Harold, think about that Saxon woman who asked what kind of king burns his future kingdom, and decide for yourself who was right, who was wrong, and whether maybe, just maybe, they both were and neither was. And the real lesson is that some questions don't have answers, only consequences that echo through centuries.